And welcome back. In a move that's being celebrated as a major step for accessibility and inclusion, Clearwater Mall on Johannesburg's West Rand has launched an on-demand sign language interpreting service, making shopping easier and more inclusive for deaf and hard-of-hearing customers. Through a simple QR code, shoppers can now instantly connect via video call to a qualified South African Sign Language interpreter, helping bridge the communication gap between customers and mall staff at no cost at all, and with no app or registration required. The initiative, created in partnership with CONVO South Africa, is part of a growing national effort to ensure accessibility isn't seen as an optional extra, but as a standard part of good service. Joining us via Microsoft Teams is Chelsea Williamson, General Manager at CONVO South Africa, a deaf-led company behind this innovative platform. Chelsea, good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. This is an innovative and necessary initiative. Tell us what brought it about.
Deaf-owned, deaf-led organization where we are passionate about creating accessibility for the deaf and hard of hearing community. So all of our founders, 95% of our staff are deaf, and it really came from the need within our own team, seeing that they needed accessible spaces. And just as hearing people, we have on-demand access. We wanted the same access for the deaf community to be able to enjoy life and go to the retail shopping centers or the public transport sector and be able to have that immediate access to communication.
How does this on-demand service work?
So it's as simple as scanning a QR code. So a deaf person walks into Clearwater Mall, for example, one of our newest partners, and they'll see a QR code throughout the mall. They simply take out their device, scan the QR code, and then they'll have access to an interpreter on their phone, and that interpreter will interpret that conversation for them. So for example, if a deaf person wants to go buy a tent because they love camping, they walk into their favorite store and they scan the QR code, and then they'll have the interpreter on their phone to ask those questions. I want this size tent, it needs to be weatherproof, it needs to have all these things, and they can have that conversation on demand, immediate time, with a real live interpreter that will interpret that conversation for them.
Yeah. What does the market data tell you about how deaf customers and people who have a hearing deficiency experience the shopping experience currently?
So I think the first thing is we say deaf and hard of hearing, and the deaf and hard of hearing community, they find, and it's one of those things that I find so interesting with my team, is my team said they didn't realize how little access they had until they had access. So up until now, the deaf community, they've made a plan. They write things down on a piece of paper and pass it back and forth, or they'll text things on their phone to the person and write it back and forth. But English isn't their home language. So their English will be very broken, just like an isiZulu speaker or isiXhosa speaker. English isn't their home language. So for a deaf person, the only difference is they don't have any access to any spoken language. So even if they're writing things down in any language, it's still going to be broken. So this has now shifted that. And with South Africa, we're a multilinguistic country. And that's one of the many beauties of this country. But now what it's done is it's given that access in their home language. It's no longer writing back and forth for hours. It's a quick, simple conversation in their home language.
Yeah, and is sign language in South Africa standardized across all 11 other languages, or is there only a single code?
I love that. So South African Sign Language is the 12th official language. In order to get it recognized as the 12th official language, it had to go through quite a rigorous process, showing that it was standardized, showing that it did have its own syntax and linguistic standardization, which it all did, and it needed to do in order to get recognized as an official language. So it does. Just like with Afrikaans, for example, in South Africa, if you're in Joburg speaking Afrikaans versus Cape Town speaking Afrikaans, they're regional dialects. There are regional dialects with South African Sign Language, but it is standardized across South Africa.
Yeah, let's talk about the cost of not having this. And I mean, this ultimately needs the buy-in of businesses and a shopping mall for you to get more partners to make the service more accessible. Retailers would have to think about what's the cost of not having such a service to our bottom line, for them to genuinely look into this beyond just the empathy of saying we need to just make the country and services more accessible. How does that conversation play out with yourself and retail partners?
So it's a very interesting conversation that we have. And to be completely honest with you, we've engaged with retail partners who have just said to us, oh, they're not interested in it. And you know what? That's their right. But we love working with partners, whether it's in the retail space or the corporate space or the transportation space or the hospital space. We love working with partners that not only acknowledge the ROI, the return on investment, but they also acknowledge the SROI, which is the social return on investment. And what ultimately happens is there's 5 million deaf and hard of hearing South Africans in South Africa. So that's a huge group of individuals in South Africa that don't have access before CONVO. So what we're doing is we're bridging that gap and opening doors for 5 million deaf and hard of hearing South Africans. So we target individuals that are passionate about true inclusivity and are purpose driven. And we're seeing South Africa is moving towards a purpose driven environment. People don't want to just go to the shops anymore to buy things. They want to go to engage, to connect. As we seeing more remote work coming into play, we're seeing more and more places that people wanting spaces to connect. And you can't do that without accessibility.
Yeah, accessibility in South Africa still is left to the discretion of those who decide what our public spaces look like and how we access that. Very little of it is translated into policy and very little of it is inculcated into practice. Where are some of the policy and practice gaps that we need to fill to make our world, and South Africa in particular, more accessible to people who are deaf and hard of hearing?
Absolutely. So this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, is using the current legislation that we've got. Now, South African's legislation, to be very honest with you, is one of the most progressive in the world on paper. We don't struggle with legislation, we struggle with implementation. South African Sign Language being recognized as the 12th official language, and we've got the South African Sign Language Charter. We've also got the South African Constitution, which says that you cannot discriminate a person based on a disability. There's the Employment Equity Act. We've got a lot of legislation that says you cannot discriminate against a person based on a disability. However, in practice, we're not seeing that happen. So first of all, we need a disability-specific act. So America, for example, has the ADA, which is the American Disability Act. England has their own. And we're seeing globally having a disability-specific act is so important. So South Africa is in the process. It's in Parliament at the moment being debated, which is the Disability Act for South Africa. Once that gets passed, accessibility and reasonable accommodation will no longer be nice to haves. They will be enshrined in legislation, meaning that all spaces need to be accessible to all people with disabilities, including the deaf and hard of hearing community. But again, South Africa is great with legislation.
Yeah.
We need to focus more on implementation.
Yeah. Let's talk about the platform just very briefly in terms of its scale. How many interpreters are available at any given time?
So we always have interpreters. We base our scheduling based on demand. So we make sure that anytime you call, there will be an interpreter available. We used to be 24 hours. However, we saw there wasn't a demand for 24 hours. So we've shifted our operating hours from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. So anytime during that time, weekends, public holidays included, anybody will have access to that. And if they do need an interpreter after hours, they are always welcome to reach out to us. We've had that happen, and we will make sure that we'll have an interpreter available for you during those times as well.
Yeah, and certainly the encouragement would be to have more South Africans actually learn sign language so that ultimately your service becomes redundant, because then we can all just communicate effectively and efficiently with each other. Do we have any idea about what the uptake of sign language is in South Africa?
So there's very interesting things happening. One of the things, one of my colleagues is working on. The Department of Education is looking at implementing South African Sign Language as a teaching language in hearing schools. So instead of doing another second language, you can take South African Sign Language. And I think that will really implement exactly what you're saying, having more people know South African Sign Language. I can't speak to that directly, how many people know it. But I myself studied it, I did my honors in it, and I know many, many other people that have, but we do need more people studying South African Sign Language.
Chelsea, thank you so much for your time, thank you so much for your service, and all the best, really do appreciate it. I certainly do also need to take up sign language in South Africa a lot more, given the sheer amount of people that I communicate with on a daily basis.